Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of ChatNAPT with the AI Chatterbots Chuck and Howie. I'd like to introduce my co-host, Howard Zion. Howard, how are you today?
Good afternoon, viewing audience. How are you today, Chuck?
Summer's here.
I love it. We actually have regular mowings of the lawn, the sprinkler system, irrigation system's running. That's all signs of a positive, warm part of the year.
It's a good thing because, you and I have talked probably too many times about ethics, integrity, and I'm telling you, I've been seeing some things since you and I talked, ourselves. We got to have an episode devoted just to ethics and integrity in our business. What gets me, Howard, is these people that live in this dream, they preach ethics. They preach that they live in glass houses when it's convenient for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then they turn a blind eye when it's not convenient. That is the hypocrisy that just drives me crazy, and I want to call people on it so bad.
Let me ask you, do you think that's intentional, or is that just somebody not being consistent about who they are?
I don't know. How would you know until you ask the person the question?
I've been adopting this phrase lately, and it's not very positive. I'm being kind of a pessimist. The older I get, the more I realize that human beings are defective. Everyone, all of us, including...
Oh, yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
We just, physically, biologically, mentally, socially, we're just not very consistent in how we are, who we are. And that's just all part of growing and learning and sometimes degrading because of life events. And so I wonder if this is human nature that you're witnessing, or if it's intentional, which is even worse, right? And without having specific examples, you could probably think of a couple that are somebody who's not very consistent in who they are.
Yeah. Well, when you're not consistent, I think that you have to understand that these are people that they know they're being, I don't want to use the word dishonest, but they have to be, knowledgeable that they are pencil whipping a calibration. When you pencil whip a calibration, you know that you're doing it wrong.
Yes.
And when you preach on a high horse that you believe in ethics, that you believe in integrity in our business, which we have we have this code that we have, but then you turn a blind eye to it when it's convenient for you to make a buck.
Let's use that as an example. Let's say I'm company XYZ, and I've got a couple of people who've been in metrology, trained through the military, right? Schools, whatever. And they've been in the business for 15, 20 years. And so they're doing calibrations, and they hire a couple of new people who really haven't had the training, and they're trying to mentor them into position. And let's say that one of the junior techs does something wrong in the calibration, and it doesn't get checked for whatever reason. Would you call it an integrity issue, and on whose part?
Well, you haven't given me enough circumstances, but I would probably say it was a mistake.
A mistake on the technician's part.
Yeah.
I call it an integrity issue on the company's part. You got somebody new, and you know you need to check their work.
Okay.
They don't know when to ask what they don't know.
Right.
You need to be reviewing that. So
yeah, that makes sense.
But if a senior tech who's been doing this for years does something like that, you're right. They know better.
Yeah, exactly. Well, again, so we have a whole show here, my friend. I'm telling you, maybe for season end, we'll dedicate the whole show to integrity, ethics, and we'll come up with some examples and explore what the community should be doing based on, our combined 50 plus 100 years of experience that we have here. We have an interesting guest today.
Yes, very appropriate guest.
Well, we have what I consider one of those people that we talk about that's up and coming, that is probably going to become what we call a player, very knowledgeable, been around a few years now, knows the business, has made a name for himself already. I have a lot of respect for this individual, very knowledgeable. And we're going to get a different side. So far, we've had, auditors, we've had, skilled people from technicians, we've had board people, we've had people from the bio side. Now we're going to have a straight up person that does mostly auditing. Jeremy's been around for 28 years. He's been in the metrology business. He was in the Navy. He's PML trained. He worked at a rather large company as a technician, then as a quality, works his way up all the way to quality manager of this large organization. Then he left and became a metrology engineer at Honeywell. And he currently holds a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering. And he now owns his own Cal lab called NexusCal. He is a provider of consulting, auditing, calibration services, and he also provides accreditation assessments for two major accreditation bodies for 17025 and 17043, which is very relevant to what we do. So
That's a lot of amazing experience.
Hey, guys, how's it going?
wow, what a surprise.
I thought it'd be fun to drive to Howard's house and do this.
Quick photography. Yes, because Jerry lives 15 minutes from me.
Well, 15 minutes on a normal day.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe not 15 minutes when they decide to shut down half the roads on the way here.
Yeah. So that brings me to another point here. There are 4 seasons in the middle to upper states of the U.S., right? And this probably goes around the world, but it depends on your location. And so there's spring, there's summer, there's fall. Oh, wait, I said it backwards. There's fall, there's winter, there's spring. You know the other one, orange cone season.
Orange cone season.
Yeah.
Stupid road construction. Oh my gosh. So he got stopped trying to come over here on the main road that you would take between where he lives and where I live.
Yeah.
Except that, for the last 2 weeks, they've been doing work on that road, not on this end of it, but on the further end out further east.
Yeah. Well,
Where I got stuck going out to our new site that we have out there. Anyway, so they caught up with him on this end of it, and the flag person just says, stop, and you're going to sit there for 15 minutes or so.
yeah.
You're not going anywhere.
It was long enough. They had a pace car you had to follow.
Oh.
Right. So it's a couple miles. And you just stop.
What does that sign say on the end of that car?
Follow me.
Follow me.
Yeah.
And so what happens when you get to the end of the part where they don't want you to follow them anymore? It still says follow me. You end up going off the road.
Right. I guess I'd just like to say, you guys are talking about integrity and ethics and what we do. And here's my 2 cents as input into that thought train, which is what I find a lot, given that I've had the opportunity to visit lots of places and meet lots of people and lots of different cal labs and other industries, is that I don't know. Sometimes it could be definitely an integrity issue, right? They know better. And, but what I find a lot is they don't know. They don't know what they don't know, and they haven't taken the time to research it to find out because they're
Really?
too busy doing whatever else, I'm not saying that's always, but I definitely see that as a component of what you guys are talking about. It's not even integrity as much as it is not understanding our world. Like you think they would.
Well, how do you get into this business and not know? I mean, as a business owner, you're going out, you're advertising to potential clients, you're talking with them that you want to support their business and make sure their equipment is measuring properly. How do you do that and not know enough to be dangerous?
I'm not saying I see it in every place by any stretch. I would say more often than not, people, even when they don't know, they want to know. Honestly, the most interesting part of it is some of the labs where I've written the most findings are the most grateful for the information that's provided during that process,
Do you see it more with internal labs versus external labs? Or do you see any about
the not knowing? I definitely see the not knowing stuff with internal labs more than external labs. I think they just don't have that external connection to all the rest of our industry and our world as much as maybe some of the external labs.
So that may make more sense then. If they don't have the expertise inherently.
Yeah.
Right. But then they're not really serving people publicly, right? From a consumer point of view. But they are serving their own manufacturing process, which is kind of concerning.
I mean, and then like everything else, right? There's people that are really good at their jobs, and then there are people that aren't really so good at their jobs, but they all can still be in the business. So
yeah, right.
I don't know. It's just another facet of it, right? 'Cause sometimes I think it could be less integrity and more just not knowing and not having or taking the time to learn, to research the information. And we all know the more you dig, the deeper the rabbit hole goes every single time. So
my thought is now, as you're talking, I'm sitting here thinking, how do we standardize this? Well, that's what 17025 was supposed to do. But there are some companies, especially internal labs, who say, I don't need that.
Yeah.
That's not a requirement by our particular industry or our particular company. But what it brings is that consistency in the integrity of the work.
Assuming you have consistency in interpretation of sense
And there's that too.
and there's enough leeway in there and such, and wiggle wording or whatever other language you want to use, that I come across some interesting interpretations of various clauses.
Oh yeah.
Yes. So, and the phrase, so I hear the phrase, well, that's not how we interpreted it.
I mean,
Frequent enough.
standards are subject to that kind of variation, right? But at least going from no standard to give you guidance to a standard that says, yeah, you can check your training and your personnel and this, that, and the other, right? The
Okay.
standards that you're using and the uncertainties of the method. At least it gives you a checklist.
Yes.
Even if you're not 100% to whatever the interpretations are of that, at least it gives you something to standardize on.
And then you have some variability with even the accrediting bodies, right? Because they don't always interpret or apply all the rules or all the clauses.
Now you're going to get stuck talking.
I mean, they all have slightly different interpretations. Not always. It depends on the clause, but there's definitely different interpretations about different clauses or exactly what they might, or, even in their own requirements impose upon a lab. So,
Wow.
Within their own assessor cadre.
right. Like, so this accrediting body says you have to do this for your uncertainty budget, but this accrediting body might say it might not be as explicit as this one, right? Or things like that. So there's still some variability even in the accrediting bodies is what I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I think they're all generally trying to apply it the same, but you get some variability in there.
Yeah. So one of the things we're very concerned about with proficiency testing is the most recent document that they're supposed to be following and incorporating, and they haven't yet, which is kind of surprising because what was the date that it's supposed to be incorporated?
July.
Yeah. And that's not far away.
Yep.
So maybe they're working on it, but you think you'd see some evidence of it being implemented. Okay. I want to get to discussions on how you see proficiency testing when you're assessing labs.
Oh boy. Well, that'll take up the rest of the time. All right. So, I've seen lots of stuff, right? I've seen everything from, the standard we use, let's say, one of the 17043 accredited providers to, hey, we made up some stuff in a spreadsheet and we don't even have rules.
Oh.
I've seen proficiency tests where people have taken a bunch of data. They're like, I guess that's good enough.
Compared to what?
Yeah, that's usually the question I ask next.
Ooh.
So what was the criteria for accepting this or not accepting this? And then that seems to vary pretty greatly. Sometimes they actually will do an EN calculation, normalized error, right? Sometimes it's just, we looked at the difference and it wasn't greater than our uncertainty, so we're good.
Now, so even if they're doing an EN calculation, what's the reference value?
That is also an interesting topic, which seems to vary depending on what we're talking about. I think where you see a lot of companies that do their own proficiency testing are certainly in areas where there's not really a lot of availability, or there doesn't make a lot of sense to, like, let's say, ship a scale around, right?
Yeah.
And then, there are some commercially available ones where the PT provider will send like a weight kit around or something, but that requires the lab then to have a balance of sufficient resolution to even see any kind of error in their own weights of whatever level they're doing, right? So that's not particularly great. So what you find, at least that's one I see a lot of, because I do a lot of assessments of, and I consult for some.
So what
but
when you see these things that are just blatant error, right? They're just wrong. And you address that or ask the questions, what kind of range of responses do you get? Do you get like from cooperative to, oh, I didn't realize that. Hey, let's have a good discussion and just go into a good discussion. Do you get people who are belligerent and just disagree?
I've heard some pretty interesting stories from other assessors about things they've heard. I guess at this point, I've done well over 200 assessments, audits, and things like that. I've only had a couple instances where people got a little upset. It wasn't even about PTs, it was about uncertainty budgets.
Well, that's good.
But so I guess I've been fortunate. I guess maybe it's how I approach it. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But the range of answers, sometimes it's, well, I thought that was good enough, or it's not, the Cal Labs aren't required to follow, let's say 17043, right? They're not required to read ISO 13528 and understand the various kinds of analysis they might be able to do, or when to throw out outliers, or all those things. Let's say somebody like an APT might be required to do because they're accredited. Well, they're not required to do that stuff. They don't have to go to that rigor. They're not taking the time to read that stuff. And I mean, again, I'm generalizing.
Problem, right?
I'm not generalizing, right? Obviously, I'm not saying everybody does that, because there was one lab that their internal PT program was so sophisticated. I told the accrediting body, I need to send out a statistician, because I'm like, I don't have time to dig through that amount of data to figure out whether it's correct or not. It was hundreds of pages of analysis and this stuff.
So clearly they've done their homework.
Yes.
It looked legitimate, but you'd need to dig further to find out.
There was one anomaly, but I questioned as an anomaly. But yeah, like, it was extensive. So I guess the range of what you see is crazy, but I'd say generally speaking, most of what I see, some data they took amongst their technician, and they do an Ian calculation, and sometimes maybe that is good enough for exactly what they're doing there. I question what the traceable reference is a little bit, but
there you go.
If they can provide decent information on how they determined what their traceable reference was and where they got their reference uncertainty and things like that, I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, if it eventually becomes circular within their organization, maybe it's not even a single site. Maybe they have multiple sites around the world, but it's still not comparing outside of that, right? So
yeah,
that could be a problem.
It could be. Yeah, and what do you do with that, right? So 17025, right, says that they have to do PTs or ILCs with outside organizations, but like where applicable or where they can, right? So then they say, well, I can't. What are you going to do about it? I can't.
And APT and others exist, so they can.
Sometimes, right?
Unless it's a measurement parameter that nobody has, right?
Right. NAPT has a pretty wide scope of parameters that they can do PTs for, and certainly, but it doesn't cover everything,
Yeah. Okay. Jeremy, let me ask you this question, if I may. My biggest problem, and I'm going on the record for saying this, my biggest problem, and hopefully, P9, once the ABs address this, will solve some of this questions where you're required then to comply with the documents, the 43 document, and doing statistics and recording, have a planned statistics. They prefer you use 13528, but 528, as we both know, gives you some, flexibility in how you establish the reference values. But my intention was that the ABs allow you as the assessor to accept what I call, your proof that they do their stuff on toilet paper. And you almost have to accept that because they're not very stringent. So they're requiring the PT providers to, comply with this big, huge checklist, which is 1743. And they're expecting you to, provide a service, a product in accordance with all its requirements. But then they have this internal document that says, well, you should do this. Well, they're not abiding by it. Why are they not saying, if you don't do this, then you have to, if you want to do it yourself, which I don't have a problem with an organization doing their own PTs. I really don't. If you're not going to use an outside provider, you want to do it yourself, good for you. At least you're doing it. I think you need to do it. And that's what doing is all on the conversation. But my contention is there should be an even playing field. If the AB is requiring a provider to comply with a certain set of requirements for acceptance as a PT requirement, then why are they not requiring the internal laboratory to comply with the same set of requirements?
It's an interesting question. So I do understand what you're saying. And I think I would equate it to the same as whether a laboratory is accredited or not, right? So a laboratory doesn't have to be accredited. They're not required to be accredited to even be traceable, right? I mean, you can be traceable without being accredited. It certainly makes the approval and pathway easier if they are, but there's no absolute thing that says you can't be traceable without being accredited.
It's true, but the two are the same. And what I mean by that is accreditation under 17025 requires measurement uncertainties among other components to be traceable. Right. NIST's website also indicates that measurement uncertainty reporting is required to be traceable. You've got to carry that forward for it to propagate forward to the product. A lot of people don't understand that, or they view that as, oh, that only applies to mass standards. But no, this the uncertainty of that measurement, that variability that is required to understand how much error can that induce on the next level down for that instrument being used. Now, anywhere in the process, all the way down to measurements on product.
Certainly.
So they both require the same components, but you're correct. You don't have to be 17025 accredited formally to have traceability. You have to have all those components that are required in both. And 17025 is a phenomenal, worldwide accepted checklist of the things you need to keep an eye on to keep things in control so your measurements don't get out of control.
So, I guess where I was trying to go with that was that there's no requirement to be accredited to work in our field, right? Just like I doubt there'll be some enforced requirement to only use accredited PT providers in our field. And do I like rules? Of course I like rules. I'm a quality guy by heart, right? That's what I've been doing. And do I think that it's better if they do? Certainly. I think it's better. I agree with Chuck wholeheartedly that if you followed 17043, your program would be better off for it, whether you used in a commercially available product or not. I find frequently enough people have a hard enough time understanding uncertainties, much less all the rules in 17043. And I'm happy if we can get them over the first time. I think we'll get there. I think it's going to take more time. And how you force non-accredited labs to understand and use uncertainties and everything, that's a great question.
Maybe you and I should come up with a calibration for dummies book. And I don't mean that derogatorily. I mean, strip out all the language of all the, source documents, international documents, whatever, and get it down to the nuts and bolts. This is why this is important. Here's what's important.
So it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I have actually written at least a why is calibration kind of important. I was writing it because I was part of a committee at one point. I was trying to participate, and so I had an objective to write a why get into metrology kind of thing, right? And so I was kind of going down that path anyway. And then I've more recently been requested to write a basic uncertainty training. I mean, basic, like from ground zero, and there's some great documents out there already for it, but, creating one that we can put publicly, not necessarily.
There's been a number of papers like that from measurement uncertainty to try to get the basics across, getting away from metrology and getting into why are my cookies not turning out like grandma's, right?
Right.
And here's all the components of uncertainty that create that difference. There's lots of good examples like that you can use analogies to understand measurement uncertainties as well.
I'd certainly be interested in working on, and something if you wanted to work on, why do we do this and why is it important? I mean, I know that stuff exists out there too. I've seen it, and I know even in your past, you've created similar types of documents and such. And even back in the day, we wrote some papers on what do I do with this information, when I get it. And then you, me, and Phil, have written some papers back in the day on these kinds of topics. But
I've said a couple of 3-part series papers that we presented together at the conferences. And, taking it from why is it important? How does it drive the industry? What problems does it create in the industry if you don't catch these things? And it gets into a little bit of detail. We use I think one of them we had dimensional, like plug gauge examples, which is good for the people who want to take it from the conceptual thoughts to practical thought, right? How do I actually apply this? And then for others, you don't have to get mired into the details of the numbers to understand the concepts. You can still read through those papers and just ignore the details that might be confusing to you in the first pass. And then as you get more into the industry and experience as a calibration tech, you can go back and look at those and get more out of it, right?
But I think sometimes people underestimate the complexity of what we do. On the surface, it looks real easy, right? On the surface, I just put the torque wrench on there and pull on it and take my torque reading, right? But it's when you start getting into the math, the physics, the uncertainties, it starts getting complicated quickly, and I think that's what fascinates me and keeps me driven in our field, because I'm always learning something new about some measurement, that I thought I understood pretty well.
Yeah.
You find out, I guess I didn't quite consider that.
It's probably because people take a look at simple things like a hand tool, caliper, or something like that, and say, how hard could that be to calibrate a caliper, right? Did you calibrate the step function? What is that? Oh, okay. So you didn't really understand all the measurements this tool makes.
I mean, I think there's always going to be things that we don't know, but and I don't know how you get past that unless somebody goes, hey, and I think that's part of what I try to do when I have conversations with people, especially people who aren't directly in our field for sure.
Yeah.
This is why this matters. This is how this affects you. This is what this means and translates into whatever you're doing with it,
I can't tell you how many times I've had this conversation with a customer. You probably have too. Taking a look at your inventory of instruments and you've got a bunch of stopwatches. Oh, we don't calibrate those. We just buy them new with a certificate and then we throw them away when they're done. Okay, real quick lesson on traceability. You understand that the closeout, which is end of period reliability, tells you how that instrument performed over its use. Did it shift? Did it change material outside of its performance specs? If it did, you need to go back and see what happened to the measurements you were making with it, right, on your product. Now, this current customer that we have, a brand new customer, great answer. That's okay because down the line, we test the product this way, and that's the traceable measurement that we need. So it's not as critical on the stopwatch measurements. Fantastic. That's what I wanted to hear. That's us tying our knowledge of metrology and traceability to your knowledge of your product and all of that process. But too many times I've heard, we throw it away, don't need it. Did you understand traceability? No, I guess I didn't realize that. We probably shouldn't be doing that.
You know where I see that one a lot? The temperature humidity. They'll buy little temperature humidity meters.
Oh, yeah.
And then they'll put them on a 2-year cycle, which may be okay, maybe not, right? But then they buy the new ones in 2 years, right? And then
or I don't need to calibrate my thermocouples.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So,
but I calibrate the indicator.
Yeah, I run into that quite a bit.
Yeah. And for those in the listening audience, if you're not aware, your sensor in any application is where the greatest error lies, not the readout, right? The meter itself is typically very linear, usually stays well within spec, still needs to be checked, right? But it's the probe on any pressure probe or temperature probe, all those things. That's where your major error is, and that's why you need to calibrate those units.
And you see that a lot with thermocouple. Not so much RTE and thermistors, but definitely thermocouples all the time. They're like, well, I got this wire twisted bend. I took the measurement. What? And there's a heat treating standard out there, right? AMS 2750, and it's got its own things or whatever. It's also not a perfect standard, but I like it because it at least puts requirements on the end user to calibrate their thermocouples, how often they can be used based on what temperatures they're used at. Like there's rules, right? There's rules on.
There's your rules again.
I love rules, man. And then there's things in place to say, like, here's where it's acceptable and here's where it's not acceptable. Right. But in the wild world of calibration, that's, that doesn't exist, right? There's nothing there is, right? It tells you your standard should be calibrated. For some reason, people don't think it's thermocouple pros as a standard.
Right.
In thermocouple pros, you're 100% right. That's where most of your uncertainty is going to come from, right?
Oh, yeah.
They're just not. They're great for temperature range and not particularly great accuracy-wise.
No, they're not.
So that's always a fun one.
Yeah. Chuck? Sorry, we're picking up a lot of the word time.
I'm just listening to everything. I'm enjoying listening to you guys go at it. I talk too much usually anyways already. Wait, let's change topic here for a minute. So we got to know a little bit more about Jeremy. Jeremy, tell us about you. We never got the chance to actually get introduced to you. And we talked about, you worked for a major company there for a while and you started your own Cal lab. How's that going for you?
Pretty good, actually. Right now I'm up to 5 customers I consult for, or I just do consulting, QA type work, the creation of uncertainty, bugs, neat stuff like that, right?
That's awesome.
So I'm up to, so that's good. And, but not quite enough to cut back on the assessing yet. And then, I've done some Cal work, calibration work for a couple of, I'm not accredited yet, but don't worry, I'll get there. I just, it's a big expense, right? And it's easier when you work for the big company to go get accredited. It's a little more interesting when you
you got to build your revenue volume and profitability to pay for that.
So I actually, one guy, he does backflow tester.
Oh, I know.
And so he brought me his gauges, and then he told this guy, and then this guy just called me out of the blue. I didn't even know, right? So we're starting to see a little more calibration and trying to keep up with everything. But I've no complaints. I'm happy that this is how things are going, generally speaking. So yeah. But I'm enjoying it. And
We know you're a road warrior because obviously you're doing a lot of cals. So what do you do when you're not on the road?
work. I try to make it so that Saturdays are family day. Like I try not to do work on Saturdays unless I just absolutely have to, so that I can spend time with my wife and the grandkids or whatever we're doing. And stuff like that. But typically Sunday to Friday, I work. It's pretty much most of my time. Sometimes I might have a little bit of free time to play a video game or something with my cousin or my son, or that's how we kind of stay connected, and we like doing that kind of stuff. Or, sometimes, every once in a while I get to go on a motorcycle ride. I think I've had it out for about 50 miles this year.
Yeah, well,
So,
definitely the weather for it now.
yeah, and so I stay pretty busy to the point now that I'm actually have, I don't have employees, but I have other contractors helping me do work now because I just can't keep up with it all. So,
Well, that's a good place to be.
yeah, so it's not bad. And then,
That's the
like I
start.
said,
That's the start of expansion.
I like it. So
First you're having growth, now you're having expansion.
it's been good. It's been good.
That's good to hear.
But otherwise, sometimes just the wife and I sitting and watching a movie is pretty great.
Yeah.
Just quiet time.
Well, I mean, you're traveling not just in the U.S., but all over the world, right?
Yeah, so I've been as far as Bangkok, Ho Chi Minh. I was in Debrecen, Hungary.
Wow.
I have an assessments in Germany this year.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see. I think I have to go to the Philippines this year. So,
What's your favorite place so far?
I don't know if I
Where would you go back to for a vacation?
Singapore.
Wow, we've heard that before, haven't we?
Yeah, we have.
It's an awesome place. Like you hear stories about how clean it is and all that stuff. Like they're not joking.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. Like I would like to go back to Hungary, but like not at the third week of December, when it was 30 degrees the whole time.
No, not ideal.
But I feel like it's probably a very pretty country in the summertime. But yeah, Singapore, I would definitely like to go back to Singapore.
Didn't Mitch tell us Hungary is one of the places he'd go back to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Pete did too. Pete
Oh,
said
yeah.
hungry.
Yeah. So there's a consensus there.
Yeah. I mean,
That's awesome.
they're very interesting places to visit, and
Yeah.
they're different overseas about metrology than I think we are here. I think they're a little less lax about it. I don't know if that we're lax about it. Not all of it. I mean, it's a different feeling. They seem a little more
Respectful.
yeah, maybe that's the right word for it. Stringent. They followed a little more strictly, I guess. At least from my limited experience overseas, I can't say that unequivocally, but that's been
Interesting observation.
So they probably have better ethics. Higher integrity.
I don't know if I
There
go
has
that,
to be integrity.
I don't know if I go that far, but that might be a statement I'm unwilling to make at this point in time.
I got a personal question for you.
Sure.
I hear things about your truck.
No.
Tell
My
me.
truck, man, it's a cool truck. It's a 69 Chevy C10.
That's cool.
And yeah, it's been in my family since I was, my dad bought it when I was like 5 years old, right? And for the longest time, it was supposed to go to my brother, right? He was going to take it, and he finally decided he wasn't going to do anything with it.
Right.
So he said, no, go ahead and take it. So it went
Does it
down.
need work or does it need?
Oh, no, it definitely needs work.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot.
Okay.
So I got a buddy of mine, he has a trailer. So we went down there, picked it up, drug it back to my house, and mildly funny story. Now, it wasn't at the time. So when we got it to the house, I was pulling it into the garage, and it runs, right? So I was pulling in the garage, but when I did I put down some plastic, and because it leaks a little bit, and I didn't want to get it all over the garage floors.
Sure.
And so I was putting down some plastic, and when I did it, the throttle stuck a little bit, and I almost ran through the back of our house. Yeah, not. It's funny now. It wasn't funny.
How would you explain that one?
Well, luckily Amy moved out of the way when she saw it happening, because she was standing almost in front of it when it happened.
Well, I got to tell you, insurance companies like when you hit your own stuff. If you're going to hit something,
yeah.
they want you to hit your own stuff that they insure. That's what I've been told. So I don't think they would like that.
No, you know what stopped me? There was a wall. There's like a little wall and like a little closet area in the garage. And then there was a deep freezer in there. So between the wall and the deep freezer is what stopped the truck from going through the
Wow.
wall. Yeah, it's funny now. It wasn't funny then. So anyway, we worked on it a little bit, but now I've just been so busy lately. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to spend any time on it like I'd like to. But the idea is to strip it down, frame up, and kind of resto mod it. I don't think I'll go back original.
That's a retirement project, and you're a long ways from retirement.
I mean, yeah. I definitely got a ways to retire. Although Amy did point out it's not as far away as it is in my mind, right? In my mind, that's like 1,000,000 years from now. And unfortunately, it's not.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can look forward to that at some point in the future.
Yeah.
Whenever that is.
Hopefully sooner
It
rather
comes
than
quicker
later.
than
I
you
mean,
think.
If you make your millions in auditing now, you can retire in like 5 years.
Okay, I think I'm gonna have to work a bit more, and I don't know if I can do that to make millions in audit.
You just got to charge more per audit. Like
There you go.
100,000 per audit.
Yeah. I don't think that works, but
Stupid market value.
yeah, right.
Well, Jeremy, you've been so busy, so we haven't seen you at any conferences. Do you plan to go to any conferences this year, or are you not going to attend any of them this year?
I was supposed to go to IamCon, but unfortunately, my wife had a medical emergency that kind of stopped me from going. About the day before, she's okay. She's okay.
That's good.
But she spent 3 days in the hospital, and so I pretty much like the day before, I got a hold of somebody at A2LA and said, "Hey, sorry, I don't think I can make it."
Yeah, understandable. Well, I'm glad she's all right.
But I was originally supposed to go to that one. I haven't planned on going to NCSL this year. Kind of talked about it, but I booked up with other stuff. I don't think I can really fit it in. And then right after what would be that week, we're going to Ireland for vacations. I'm actually taking a vacation.
Nice.
So
Good.
Nice.
yeah,
You deserve it. That's
But
fantastic.
you're not a golfer, are you, Jeremy? Do you golf?
I'm not particularly a golfer, but I mean, I don't mind going to a driving range, but there I don't have to keep track of wherever the ball goes, Tennessee, because I'm not a golfer.
Yeah.
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 Well, what
So-
brings you to Ireland? Just is it
I
on your
always just
bucket
wanted
list?
to go, and my sister wanted to go, so it's her family and us and her brother-in-law. So there's just a big group of us
When
going
did you go?
into July.
July.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah, should be fun.
Oh, I'm guaranteed. I haven't been there, but I hear great things.
I haven't been to Ireland either. I've been to England but that's on my bucket list before. And my bucket list is I better start checking some of it off because
Yes.
I'm not getting any younger.
Yeah.
So, well, the only other question I have is what's next after Ireland then? How much longer do you plan to do accrediting? I mean, auditing, not accrediting. You plan to do this for a long time?
I don't know that I'll ever quit doing it. I may cut back on it, and how much I cut back depends on how much I get busy doing the other stuff, the consulting and the CalLab stuff. But I kind of like to do it because I feel like it keeps me in touch with what's going on in our industry more so than just going to a conference or something. Like you actually see, and honestly, I learned even in labs where maybe they don't have the most robust processes, you still always can learn something from them about how to solve the same problems that we all have to solve. But you always find something interesting, something new, even if it's just the connection you make with the people in that lab. So I don't know if I'll ever quit doing it, but I at some point, I would like not to be doing it 5 days a week, 6 days a week, every week,
That's a lot of them. Well, I think you've told me before, the amount of work you do at the site is about the same amount of work you do back home to finish things up, right?
Yeah.
Prep work.
Probably pretty close to it. Yeah, I think so. I mean, but when you're doing these things to make sure you can stay on time and on top of it, and I'll spend 2 or 3 hours a night in the hotel also working on stuff.
right.
And if I'm not working on that, I'm reviewing non-conformances I've previously written, and there's just always something to be doing amongst the other stuff that I'm doing. Right. So
Right.
Well, we gotta ask you this before we call it a day. We gotta ask you if you can share with us one of your horror stories from one of your assessments? Can you, without sharing who the name is,
Well, I
can
would
you
never
tell
do
us?
that anyway.
Can you share with us really like your worst experience that you had in an assessment?
Honestly, I've been relatively fortunate. I mean, I guess worst experience could mean a lot of things. It depends on whether you mean with people or people's uncertainty budgets or whatever. When I had them, it's where the lab gets frustrated. And then, I did have one guy kind of get up and yell at me a little bit and stuff like that. And to the point I was kind of like, all right, I'm kind of over that. We don't, hey, we're getting to my limit of, Lee, I'm not going to sit here and get yelled at. We have a job to do. Either I'm going to do it or I got to go. But I've been relatively fortunate compared to the other stories I heard. I've heard of shotguns being pulled and all kinds of weird stuff. Yeah, so I do not have any story nearly that bad.
Hatfield, the McCoy stuff?
Maybe I wasn't there.
You look like a Hatfield. Next shot of you.
I guess for me, the worst part is when you do have to go in and you tell lab, and every assessment, let's say if I'm talking about those specifically, you start with, basically we all start with the same statements about it's a sampling process. I might find things that your lab, the previous assessors didn't find, and the likelihood is another assessor will come in and find something I didn't. And it's normal because it's sampling, right? You're not going to catch everything in one assessment. And then I hear frequently, well, I hope we don't have to fix all our uncertainty budgets again. And then I have to tell them, like, here's everything wrong with your uncertainty budgets. Like, for me, that's like the worst. Like, just because now, they're already not happy about it, right? And then I'm going to have to tell them, yeah, here's what's wrong. And here's why you got to fix it,
Unfortunately, it impacts a good majority, if not all of them. You got to do it. Right? Sorry, you didn't get it right the first time. Here's how you fix that, right?
And maybe it's they didn't get it right the first time. Maybe it's the previous assessor didn't pick up on this particular detail when he looked at the uncertainty budgets, and I did. And there's 100 other reasons that these things could happen. But I guess that's probably the worst part, like when you have to tell a lab they're going to have to go fix stuff again that they thought they already fixed. And then,
So that begs the question, what did they think an assessment was supposed to do? Just find it squeaky clean and never have a problem. Of course, that you're there to find issues.
I wished I could say I hadn't had labs say to me, nobody's ever looked at that before or said that before. Yeah. But I'm sure lots of assessors do, right? I get that statement way more frequently than I thought I would.
You're not doing it like the last person.
I don't know. I can just say from my perspective, I try to do it the best I can, and follow all the requirements, and whatever I find is whatever I find,
Maybe I'm the odd one out, but I've always thought, whether it's an internal or an external audit, that the value of the audit is to show me what I missed.
Yeah.
Right. Or find things that I just haven't gotten to yet and have a plan for it, but it's taking time to implement it. But it should have some value to it.
I think so. And I don't think, if you looked at really the core of what we're supposed to do, right? My objective in an assessment is to come in, identify where there's compliance and where there's not and be done. But I've learned so much through my years with various assessors, they may not tell me what the answer is, but they may at least point me in the right direction. And I feel like I try to do the same. We have to be careful, right? There's conflict of interest, and we can't tell people how to do stuff, right? But I can say you really should go read, ASTM, whatever, ASME, whatever, those types of things. Like you should go read those unless they're just blatantly wrong. And then you try to non-conformance, right?
Sure. All right. I got a question for you. You've, for a good portion of your career, been on the customer side of auditing, where you've done audits internally for your company. And then you've experienced external auditors coming in and doing their thing. So you've seen it from that perspective. Now that you're on the other side of that, and you're the assessor coming into an organization, how did that change your perspective? What stuck out to you the most?
This side's way better.
Easier?
Oh, yeah. You just come in, you drop the bomb, and then you leave. Your day is done. What I learned from those events where I was the audit, the auditee, right? Is that don't be like some of the auditors, right? If the lab doesn't know, you try to clarify the best you can of what you're looking for. You try to come to an agreement with something's compliant or not compliant based on the information. But I try not to be I try not to be, combative or anything like that with them. I always try to work or phrase from the standpoint of this is going to help you in the end, right? This will help make your system better, because I think that's really the main objective of the process. Anyway.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, I can certainly tell Jeremy you're a good auditor. I would have no problem having you audit me. You're very politically correct. You've got a great, no, seriously, you got a great tone about you. You say the right things at the right time. So Howard, you get one more statement. We're actually at an hour already. Can you believe it? We've been here talking an hour. So you get one more
Unbelievable.
question. Yeah.
I'm going to throw my 4M question out there.
Okay.
Most memorable metrology moment.
The most memorable metrology moment when I met Howard Zahn.
Oh. And the angel sang.
He said I was being politically correct. I was really trying to lay it on.
And where was that when we met? And I know that's not your most memorable metrology moment, but where was that we met?
Where did we meet
Do
at?
you recall?
Was that the first time I visited Rochester?
Nope.
And then I don't remember.
I went to St. Louis
Okay.
to set up particle counters.
Oh, you're right. I forgot about the particle counters in St. Louis.
Yeah.
Oh boy, that was
That's when I first met you. I'd heard about you before then. And then after that, you came to Rochester.
yeah, you're right. You did come down there for the particle counter thing. That was an interesting.
So apparently it's not the most memorable, is it?
No.
The most memorable metrology moment I have, huh? I guess that's not something I sit around thinking about too much. I guess my most memorable moment would be, I guess when you come to that, all of us go through this, right? We think we understand this stuff or whatever. When you come to the realization that you always have something new to learn, you don't know everything. Not that I ever thought I knew everything, but when you're younger, right? You think you know more than you probably know.
Sure.
And then you do this longer, and you
Oh,
realize
it sounds like his father.
yeah, you realize, hey, I now know that I don't know as much as I want to know, should know, thought I knew, whatever you want to say.
Yeah. We had a lot of incredible whiteboard moments in Rochester, didn't we?
Oh, I love the whiteboards. You sit down and you just start drawing for.
We put whiteboards all over each of our offices, and so that we could just chat up a storm and draw out concepts and ideas and formulas and whatever else. And that was very helpful. So if you don't use whiteboards, I highly recommend it.
I think
And get what's out of your head out where people can see it.
I think I don't know that would be my most memorable moment, but
Yeah.
definitely one of the things I definitely enjoyed about working with teams. I mean, I do work alone a lot now, but I have a lot of references. I can call you, or I can call this person. I can talk to this person. Have you seen this? And
Yeah.
so, but I do miss the whiteboard sessions and stuff. Yeah, I mean, next thing you know, you got a whole whiteboard of formulas and graphs and everything.
And solving a problem, or maybe not.
I do sometimes in an assessment, if I'm trying to explain something and I don't think the lab's getting it, if they have a whiteboard, I'll get up on the whiteboard and I'll still draw it.
There you go.
Yeah, but this is what I'm trying to describe. Does this help make more sense?
Nice.
It does help.
Early in my career, this is when I worked for Martin Marietta, which is Lockheed Martin now. And we were talking with one of the test engineers about instruments that were used on one of the product lines for the Clear system. It was a spectrum analyzer that I think they were needing based on what he was describing, right? But he kept trying to use an oscilloscope, right? And so to get that concept across, I used solder to create a 3D model of, wavelengths, looking at it from like an oscilloscope, a time-based perspective.
That's awesome.
And then turn it on its side, and you could see how the frequency-based perspective worked with all those different sine waves, right? To get him to understand, because he'd never used a spectrum analyzer and didn't know what the difference was. So
That's pretty cool.
it ended up being a good conversation for us, and it got us over that hump, right? I probably could have drawn that out in 3D, right? But then we didn't have whiteboards. Boy, I'm dating myself way back. We had blackboards, but they weren't readily available, right? So I was just trying to make something up where I could have a conversation.
Nice.
But yeah, the whiteboards definitely help.
Definitely.
Well, we got to call it a day, my friend. Jeremy, thanks so much for taking your time out of your day to drive over in your cone season. and
Orange Cone season.
Orange Cone season and joining us for one of our episodes. We appreciate your time and your valuable input. It was a great conversation. Again, I really appreciate it.
Parting words of wisdom, Mr. Ellis.
The only words of wisdom I have is if you're not participating in proficiency testing, you're not proving you're technically competent.
He does say that a lot.
A lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would just say thank you for having me. Really
Absolutely.
glad I got the opportunity to come over and talk with you guys, and
Glad you could
be
do it.
happy to do it again.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
Look forward
there'll be
to it.
more topics to talk about for sure.
There's always more topics in our world to talk about.
We mentioned that we have enough guests between the people that we know to fill up 6 or 7 seasons.
Yeah.
And in there, we'll scatter in some return guests. So
Sure.
that'd be great.
Howard, any parting comments from you?
No, none from me. I'm all out of words.
All right. Well, until next time, then, thanks again. And I want to say thanks to our sponsor, National Association for Proficiency Testing. Check us out on web. We're there to help you out when you need us.
All right. How easy out?
Take care.
You guys.